When I parted ways with the church as we know it about 20 years ago, I did so because I knew it was not going to be a place that my faith would thrive. I found that much of what I was doing and involved in required anything but faith. It was more about good principles, good leadership, good marketing, good social media. And I thought, where's the faith? Because all of that can be seen. And faith is being sure of what I can't see, certain of what I hope for. And everything was seen. And I didn't know what to do other than just depart and set out to go find what what I hope would be possible, but I wasn't sure. And along the way, I was free to ask new questions now because my paycheck was not tied to my faith. I didn't have to worry about what I believed or didn't believe or what I was doubtful of or questioned because nobody was paying my salary that cared. And I was free to explore new ideas and new thoughts. And one of the most significant changes and improvements and upgrades for me in this journey out from the church as we know it is what I thought of the scripture. When I was a young man of faith, I was handed a law book. Here, read this every day. And through it, you will find what you're doing wrong, what you need to do right, how to find all the right answers and study it, revere it, and dedicate yourself to it. And so I did that. And I was offered a little device called SPACE, SPACE. And so first off, I'm supposed to look for a sin that I need to confess, and then I need to look for a promise I needed to keep, and an attitude to change, and C, a command to obey, and E, an example to follow. And so every day, faithfully in the morning, I open my Bible and begin to look for all the things that I'm doing wrong, all of these sins that are tied up in SPACE. And that seemed right and seemed normal because this book that was handed to me was a law. It was God's law. And why would I not want to keep God's law? And why would I dismiss it in any way? And so that worked for me for years, that metaphor that this book is the law and I better know it and better study it. But as I grew in my faith, I started to ask, is that really all this is? Is this just a book of right and wrong? Or could it be that there's something more? And so I began to study it and realize, oh no, it is something more. That the law was the Old Testament, but the book of life now was written in the new scriptures. That the New Testament was no longer the new Leviticus. Because now the whole law was fulfilled in the Son of Man and the sacrifice that he had made. And now the promised advocate, again, a legal term, the Son of Man was going to depart from the earth and leave behind an advocate, one that we could not see, but one that was well equipped to lead us into the better future. Interesting, we were given this advocate long before we were given a scripture. And that this advocate was here now to communicate to us deeply, personally, three things it was described, or it is described, that the advocate will convict of sin, and again, convict another legal term, convict of sin, righteousness, and judgment. Simply put, the advocate will help you discern right, wrong, and what to do between the two. And this was the original intent of the one who is closer than our breath, because it says the one is spirit. Spirit can't be seen. Spirit can be felt. And I started to imagine, what if I got it backwards? What if I had actually put the scripture ahead of the advocate? What if I put what I can see in front of what I can't see? What am I missing there? And the interesting description of what sin was is because you did not believe. You didn't believe the one is there. You didn't believe the one can lead you. You didn't believe the one that was given, the advocate who stands on your behalf and represents you. You didn't believe because you couldn't see. And that was a revelation to me. Oh, this book that was handed to me now is no longer a law, because I have one higher than the law, better than the law, more equipped than the law to lead. I have an advocate. And it just revolutionized my whole understanding of faith. So now, instead of going to the scripture looking for all the things I've done wrong, now I get to look and see what's the story of faith here that's written over generations. I don't need to look for things I'm doing wrong. I have the advocate that will lead me into that. But now the scripture is full of stories of men and women throughout generations who have put their faith in the one that is unseen, but that created the heavens and the earth that can be seen. So now I've got a new metaphor. Now I'm not strapped to a law book. Now I'm saddled with a book of faith, a history. And this is probably the hardest thing to communicate to people about why I left the church as we know it. Because it sounds like to some I'm dismissing or disregarding the Bible. In fact, I'm doing quite the opposite. I revere it. I interact with it every day. It's just not my law anymore. I don't look to it to try to discern what's right, what's wrong, because I have the advocate in my conscience and in my spirit to help me do that. And, you can take the very same text and two people can come up with very different conclusions about right and wrong. Are gays going to hell? Should women speak in church? How much money is too much money? You have too much. No, you should have less. And we use the same text of Scripture to come up with a new idea of right and wrong. And as I understand it, was never intended to be that way. That the advocate will decide that with us and for us. And we don't need to trust this thing that we can see and create new laws from it. No, we have an advocate within us, closer than our very breath, that is adequate and unseen to lead us into the better future. And this new way of looking at the scripture has just transformed my whole life of faith. Because I was so consumed by law. Am I doing this right? And law is a terrible burden to try to live under and try to keep. Take, for example, our laws in society about transportation. It's against the law to drive on the wrong side of the road. It's against the law to drive up on the sidewalk. Those are reasonable laws, pretty easy to keep. But how many of us can keep the speed limit? The sign says 65. If I'm going 69 or 68, am I violating the law? Well, if it's law, right? Which law is more important? So then if I begin to pick and choose, then do I get to fudge here and there on whatever else I think? But if law is a spirit meant to guide us, that we'll go 90 and break the law because our son is sick and needs to get to the hospital. Technically breaking the law, correct? But it's not the way we live, because we have a spirit that leads us above the law. And in times that law is inadequate and not helpful and useless, actually. So we don't get rid of the law for sake of order, but neither do we worship it and bow to it as our only way to solve problems. I love that image in The Shack where everyone is at the dinner table and the Trinity is around the table, and one guy asks, okay, now, which one of you are in charge? And the Trinity looked at each other and like, what do you mean? Well, which one of you are in charge? Who gets to make the final decision? And one of them said, oh, I get it. We don't operate that way. We don't need to operate that way. We have perfect trust between us. We have perfect deference. We don't solve problems by hierarchy. We solve them by love. And I think that's the better picture of the better future of the advocate, who will help us now solve problems by love and not by law. This was probably the hardest unscripted for me to deliver, because it's rife with misunderstanding of what I might be saying that you are hearing that I'm not saying at all. I've not given up on the scripture. I've given up on the church as we know it, because I'm looking for the church of the future. And that church will be led by the advocate, who leads people who believe this Holy Scripture is a history of faith that will lead to faith in the better future, the future that we have not seen yet, but it's the future that is described in the Scripture. Behold, I'm doing something new, brand new. Now it will spring forth. Will you not be aware of it? Thanks for listening.